Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All right, welcome to another edition of Simple Thinking, Simple Living, High Thinking. Varangi is unavailable this weekend, so it will just be Tadeo, Prabhu, and myself. So we are continuing in chapter 2. We're starting to get towards the end of it. We are around text 54. Today, would you like to give another summary or background of where we're picking up right now?
Yes. So chapter 2 has covered two main topics so far that Krishna directly addresses. And there are a few other points that we can extrapolate from the conversation itself, which is not directly mentioned by Krishna, but is very important lessons of chapter 2. So starting with the 2 points that Krishna directly addresses, number 1 is Sankhya. So Sankhya being the distinguish between matter and spirit, where matter is everything that exists in the universe, which does not have consciousness. So our classical elements of water, fire, air, ether, etc. So these are all material things. And then consciousness, which is a symptom of the soul, and the soul being spirit. So Sankhya is the philosophical system that Krishna introduces to teach Arjuna that he is not the body, that the body is essentially matter made out of these material elements we just mentioned, but that the nature of the self is very different, categorically different, because it is spiritual by nature. And that's who we really are, the soul within the body, which is spiritual. So that's Sankhya, the first main teaching of Krishna to Arjuna in chapter number 2. Then Krishna switches to Buddhi Yoga. So Buddhi being intelligence and yoga being the art of working in the material world with the intelligence that we now know. We now know that we are not the body, but rather we are the spiritual soul within the body. So one who possesses this intelligence, and that's what we mean by Buddhi. Buddhi is intelligence, the intelligence that we are not the body, but we are the soul. And then engages in yoga, then such a person in that acting in this yoga system is such that you will act. The yoga here is action. You're acting in the world, doing your duty, fulfilling all your responsibilities, but you are not attached to the results of your work. So that's the yoga, the Buddhi yoga that Krishna introduces. We can also think about it as, okay, now that I know that I am not this body, that I'm a spiritual soul, what do I do? Because I'm still here in the world. And what you do is you do your duty and you're not attached to the results. So those are 2 lessons that Krishna directly teaches us in Gita. Now, one very important point which we can indirectly keep in mind is that Arjuna surrenders to Krishna in chapter 2 as well, in the beginning of chapter 2, by saying, hey, Krishna, I am struggling. I have encountered this problem, which is bewildering me, and I see no way out. I have stretched my intelligence as far as I can go, and I don't see any good that will come out of me doing my duty here. So please help me. I am now surrendered unto you, and please help me. And that is such an important point, because as we have been discussing in this podcast, it is a mindset that is necessary, a mindset of our students that will surrender to a higher authority, in this case being Krishna. So that's one point that it's indirectly there, but very viable for us to keep in mind.
So on that point about surrendering to Krishna as a teacher, Krishna could have easily just started teaching Arjuna everything from the very beginning, but instead he kind of sat back a little bit and waited. What was the purpose of that?
Because Krishna gives us free will, number one, so he doesn't really want to impose his ways on us. We need to want to know and love Krishna ourselves. And this is a beautiful aspect of pains and sufferings, because through that pain and suffering, we may realize that, hey, I can no longer navigate these terrible circumstances that we may find ourselves in life every now and then. And then we'll turn ourselves to Krishna. And then Krishna is there ready to help us. Because another way to consider is this. If Krishna really wants to give us a very profound teaching that will cause us to give up all of our materialistic tendencies, he can. He's all powerful. He's able to do that. But by him doing that, something else that would happen is he would take away our free will. In one sense, we could say he would be forcing us to love him. He would be forcing us to turn away from material life and into spiritual life. But he won't do that. So he will not interfere with our free will. And therefore, that step that we take based on our choice, that I am going to seek out for help, I am going to seek out for Krishna, is a necessary step. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I first read it, I was thinking, oh, it's kind of a dance. He's just waiting patiently and letting Arjuna come around.
Right.
Yeah, that aspect of free will, because so often we think, well, God has all the answers. Why doesn't he just lay it all on us right from the beginning? So.
And it's a very interesting question you bring up, Kim, because having been in this path for quite some time, I oftentimes think to myself, I would have no issues if Krishna took my free will away and just, made me love him. I used to think like that. And it's like, that would be okay with me. Just take my free will away, just turn me back to you and take me back to the spiritual world. I would be okay with that. But there are two issues with that, right? Number one is what we just talked about. Krishna won't take our free will away. And one of the reasons why he won't take is because he's the expert supreme lover. And as such, he knows that the best version of our love to him is the one that we choose, not the one that he forces upon us. So because he's such an expert supreme lover, he is going to patiently wait to have the best version of our love towards him, which is the love that we choose to love, not the love that he forces upon us. So for that specific reason, he will not take our free will away. He will be there as a best friend companion, waiting for us to turn towards him. So that's one problem, right? If we have this mentality that I used to have, well, just take my free will away and just, take me back. The other problem is that it is quite a impersonal approach. And I will explain what I mean by impersonal here. But impersonal means Krishna is not really a person. God is not really a person. God is some kind of energy, some kind of power, some kind of intelligence, some abstract concept that we have some sort of relationship with, but it's not a person. So if we have a conception of God, if we have a conception of divinity that takes away that God being a person, then that is a impersonal view of God. Right? A lot of people speak with the language of, oh, the universe is trying to tell me something. But the universe is quite impersonal. It's quite abstract. It's not really a person. We even call Krishna, like he has a name. He's a person. That's Krishna, right? So we have a very personal view of Krishna. So if we say, just take my free will away and make me love you again, it is quite impersonal because I don't own, I don't have to own the fact that I am in a relationship with a person. And the relationship takes two people. There's the lover and there's the beloved. And we both have to engage in this symbiotic relationship, a personal relationship where we're both contributing to it. And if I just say, hey, just take my free will away and just make me love you again, it's not so personal, you know? So that's the second problem with that. But it's a very good question.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that explains it very well, the importance of surrender. So yeah, so Arjuna gets to that point of surrender, and I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, so then that opens up the doors, so where Krishna can start really teaching, because he now knows we are asking for it. And it's not that he's taking our free will away and forcing himself upon us, but instead we are asking, we are surrendering, we are saying, Krishna, please help me, because the material way of living life is not working out. And it must not work out, right? Because again, not really pessimistic, rather realistic, there is no happy ending. Even if we live an extraordinary life of honor and sincerity and love, we find we're surrounded by people that we love, we achieve all of our noble goals of becoming a honorable doctor, an honorable member of society. And even if all those things are true, at the end we die. And that's a fact, you know? So there's really no happy ending. So one way or another, we must get to this point where we realize, you know, there's something wrong here. It is not 100% complete. And that surrendering that can come through suffering is very powerful. And it is the very point, that the very moment that Krishna has been waiting for, you know, what gives Krishna the opportunity to start teaching us. Yeah, so that has happened in chapter 2 as well, in the early texts, and which has been very important.
Yeah, now in last night's class, and just for reference, last night's class was from May 1st, and I'll include a link to the podcast link for Lugana Temple. And so if you ever want to go back and review that class, we started out with text 54, where Arjuna asks basically what a self-realized soul looks like. And so can you speak a little bit to maybe the evolution of those next few verses that followed, and kind of where we are throughout the chapter?
Yes. Yeah, let's do that. So text 54, Arjuna says, "O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak? And what is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk?" So these questions are quite interesting because they're not to be taken literal. They are more metaphorical than literal questions. And the reason why we know that is because Krishna takes them as non-literal questions. Because of the way that Krishna answers these questions, we know that that's not how Krishna took. It's not that it's not that Arjuna is actually asking, hey, how does it sit? You know, does it put his right leg in front of his left leg, and then he does a squat, and then he sits like very gently and slow, or does he sit fast? Like, he's not actually concerned with the physical movements of the body, of how is it that a person sits, right? You know, how does he walk? Does he walk with a limp? Does he walk straight? Does he walk like he's tired? That's not really what Arjuna has in mind by asking these particular questions. And again, you know, we are studying Bhagavad Gita as it is. So we don't want to come up with our own mental speculation of what Bhagavad Gita means. It has its own meaning, as Prabhupada named it, the Bhagavad Gita as it is. So the reason why our commentators and our teachers and our take of these questions is that they're not supposed to be literal, again, is because Krishna himself does not take these questions literal. So then, to answer your question, Kim, there's an evolution here in Krishna's answers, which is the idea that we have material senses and we are very attached to them because we have certain degrees of the bodily concept of life. And by that, we mean that, I am a African Brazilian male, and therefore I eat certain things, certain types of music pleases my hearing, or certain tastes pleases my tongue, certain visuals pleases my eyes, and so on. I'm attracted to the opposite sex, and so on. So these things are always stimulus for the senses, and they are very strong because since birth, this is who we believe we are, this material body. And in order to be happy, we fulfill the demands of the senses of the body. So that's the bodily concept of life. And so much of our society nowadays, the measure of success is how well you have been able to serve and fulfill your senses. So the evolution that takes place here in Krishna's answers is that Krishna introduces the idea that the real way to turn away from something that is material towards something that is spiritual is by actually having an experience, an actual experience of something which is higher, something that gives you a better pleasure. And that is the experience of the self alone, which is one of Krishna's actual answer here, that Krishna says, let's see, the Supreme Personality of God had said, "O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness." So the self here is us, like who we really are, the soul, the spiritual soul. So when we are finding the satisfaction that we so hard work for in the material sense, which is outwards, but rather inwards, which is where the soul is inside of the body, where we go inwards to find satisfaction, that is the beginning of our transcendence. Because the soul, again, is already blissful because it is spiritual by nature. It's a part of Krishna who is bliss himself. So the soul is therefore also blissful. So if we are now turning inwards for our happiness, then we are finding satisfaction in the self, which is inside, inwards, as opposed to outward, meaning the things of the objects of the material existence. And then Krishna also says in text 59, the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment. Thus, the taste for, I'm sorry, let me start over. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. So that's the main evolution here, that we must experience, we must have a factual experience of what spiritual life is like. And that experience will be higher. And having experienced that higher pleasure of the soul, of Krishna, of being in a loving relationship with Krishna, then our taste for the lower, inferior material sense gratifications will cease to exist because they won't be as attractive to us anymore. They will be secondary, and primary will be our wanting to experience the self in relationship to the supreme self, which is Krishna. And that is the real way of turning away from material life, having an actual experience. What are your thoughts on that, Kim?
Yeah, when I first got into spirituality and then when I first started going to the temple, the whole concept of, oh, you won't desire those things anymore, let's say, I don't know, drinking, partying, or eating meat or whatnot. And at the time, like when I started to stop eating meat, I thought, oh, like I could see how I could get to that point, but I didn't think that I'd be happy. Like, oh, okay, I can get to this place of spiritual discipline, but to be self-realized or to be spiritually evolved just doesn't sound like much fun. Um, so my experiences now for where I am versus when I say first stopped eating meat a couple of years ago, is that it's just the opposite where yes, you do start to lose your taste for those things, um, but there's so much more happiness and joy, at least in my life, which I don't know why. Maybe I was just so pessimistic, but I wasn't thinking that, oh, it's going to be much happier on the other side when I give up these things that I thought were so great at the time. So,
Yeah. And in fact, I must confess that this specific point is to me so important. And I believe that would be important for anybody who is sincerely seeking for spiritual evolution, because it offers us an actual experience. My experience growing up in other religious traditions is such that, like, yeah, we are talking about a lot of hypothetical possibilities. And yes, I can get to this place where I will love my neighbor and as I love myself. And but it's all very theoretical, and none of that was actually really happening. And it almost feels like I was alone trying to embrace these principles, but there wasn't really a taste, there wasn't really an experience. And I think that's part of why religion nowadays is so boring. Forgive me for being so blunt. A lot of people are just not interested. In fact, we have to be so careful how we use the word religion, because it carries with it such a negative connotation of misunderstandings and wars and confusion and people fighting each other because of their religions and so on. The differences in their religions is such a cause of suffering in itself, and it has such a bad connotation nowadays. The very word religion has to be so careful. You cannot even bring it up in universities. You can't bring it up in your work environments. You can't talk about religion. You have to say, happy holidays as opposed to Merry Christmas and so on. There's this taboo all around it. And I think that this is the main reason that we, so much of so-called religious institutions are not offering an actual scientific experiment by which people can experience something which is higher. Because by experiencing something which is higher, you naturally let go of something that is lower. I love the example that my teacher gave once, which was this. Suppose you're very hungry and you're starving practically, and all you have is a banana. And you're kind of like walking around trying to be conservative because, like, when am I going to eat next? All I have is this banana here, but currently you're very, very hungry. And then I come around and I say, hey, Kim, how's it going? It's been, I haven't seen you in a while. And, I'm kind of hungry. Can I have the banana? And you're going to look and it's like, well, no way. Like, this is all I got and I'm hungry myself. Like, it's nice seeing you, but, I'm not going to give you my banana. This is all I got and I'm super hungry. That would be quite of a natural reaction, and one would understand why. That's all you got. Now, let's consider that I come around and I have with me a complete feast with so many goodies. We got, rice and beans and chickpeas and so many varieties, so many things in this full feast. And now let's bring about the same example, right? So you're coming around, you're super hungry, And I come around, hey, King, nice seeing you. It's like, hey, you know, I got this big feast here, but, you know, I'm already satisfied, but I really have this taste for this banana. Like, how about I'll give you all this feast, everything I have, and you give me the banana? And you're like, yeah, okay, now we're talking. Now you're gonna easily get rid of the banana because the banana compared to this feast I have is inferior. And this feast that I can give you is higher, is a much higher taste. And you're not gonna have any problems getting rid of your little banana for the feast that I have to give you in exchange. So that's what we're talking about, the actual experience of, of being a spirit soul and having a loving relationship with the Supreme Spirit, which is Krishna. That experience is so much higher than anything we can have in this material world. So, and the processes by which we can have this experience, right? I so much like when Prabhupada calls our movements the science of self-realization. And it is a science. There is, we have a whole theory here. We have an entire hypothesis that if you proceed in a scientific way and you do it for a certain period of time with a particular mindset in particular conditions, like in a controlled environment, exactly as it is in the science laboratory, a scientific lab experiment is a controlled environment which requires you to bring to it your discipline, your willingness to testify the hypothesis, right? If we take spiritual life in that scientific way, we will have the experience of love of God. And that will be so much higher than anything else. And it will be so much easier for us to let go of the inferior material sense gratification. So to me, this is like a very important and powerful point, which could transform the lives of so many people who are sincerely trying to verify the hypothesis that God exists, we exist, and that it's possible to have a loving relationship with that supreme being, you know?
Yeah. When I was growing up, it was a very conservative Christian religion, very fear-based, and there weren't a lot of answers. When I was a kid, I would ask my mom or dad about philosophical questions in my small
Of course he
little
would.
10-year-old brain, and there were never answers. So it was more of a blind faith situation. So here, when I started going to the temple and learning about this philosophy, it was the same thing. Like I had all these questions, and but yet the answers were so logical, so philosophical for every single question that I had. You know, as Tukaram Prabhu says, you know, he never shies away from any question. He can answer any question that we have to quell any doubts or hesitations. And then at that point, you just have to decide, like, do you, as you just said, do you want to go in the lab and try it or not? And the only way to know is to actually try it. So.
Right. And this is another beautiful point, right? We were discussing earlier, why doesn't Krishna just take us? He could, right?
Yeah.
Well, the lab is there, but we must walk in, right? I hate to bring such a cheesy example here, but I must because I believe a lot of people would know what I'm talking about. When Morpheus presents to Neo either the blue or the red pill, you know, he's not forcing. He didn't force Neo to take
No,
either the blue or
that's
the red.
true. Yeah.
Like, here's the red and here's the blue. If you take this one, you will see how deep the rabbit hole goes. And if you take this one, you wake up and you go live life as you know it. Go do whatever it is that you're wanting to do. It's on us. You know, it's on us. It is up to us to enter into the lab and experience for ourselves. And I think what Krishna consciousness gives in such a unique way is the actual scientific process of attaining it, which I believe was missing in so many places that I looked for, you know. And Krishna is right here saying it himself. We must have a higher taste, and then our life can be transformed.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting to me when Tukram Prabhu pointed out that, oh, this is the first place in the Gita where Krishna starts bringing up theology, where if you believe in a soul, you're a spiritualist, but if you believe in God, you're a theist. And so Krishna starts bringing in himself, like, yes, look towards something higher, and um, I am the higher thing. So
Yeah, that happens in 261. Krishna says, one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control. So let's just stop here and let's think about it, right? If you are restraining your senses, it really you would put such a person in such a different category than most people on this planet today. Because we're not trying to restrain our senses. Hey, if it's Friday night and I already put in my hard week of work, I want to go now and enjoy my senses. I don't want to restrain them, right? And that's quite normal. That's just an observation, right? Just an objective observation here. Most people on the planet today act in this normal way. This is normal in our society today. But we're not, here we're saying one who is restraining his senses by keeping them under full control. Now, this is full control, right? No room for partial control. Oh, you know what? I'm going to give up drinking alcohol this weekend, but next weekend, just have a little glass of wine and that would be fine. Like, we are saying full control here, like no more. So it is so austere, right? It sounds so austere, sounds so boring. Well, then how are you going to have fun, right? So one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, but then fixes his consciousness upon me. Like, so now we're going inside because Krishna is in our hearts, right? So now my senses are restrained. They're under full control. So they're not going outside, but then now I am focusing my consciousness inwards, which is what Krishna means by when he says upon me. So then Krishna proceeds and he fixes his consciousness upon me. He is known as a man of steady intelligence. So that's steady intelligence. Why? Because I know I am fixing my consciousness inwards upon Krishna and myself, and that is much higher. and also, I'm glad we finally are getting to this texts of Bhagavad Gita, because in the beginning, we are talking about what seems to be just the austere aspect of our practice, right? We're going to control our senses. We're going to study scriptures. We're going to meditate for 2 hours a day. And where's the fun? Like, there's no fun, like it seems boring and so on. But actually, this is a very effective, a very clever, a very intelligent way to actually enjoy, to have actual enjoyment. My teacher said once that he went to university. He's a graduate from Yale, and he says that he went to university because he was trying to find out what is the highest pleasure. And so he thought, how is it that he says that knowledge without pleasure doesn't work out? Because you have all the knowledge, right? But then you don't get any pleasure. So who is going to continue to strive for knowledge if you acquire all knowledge, but there's no pleasure there? So knowledge without pleasure, what is the use? He said, there's no use for us to cultivate all this knowledge if it doesn't lead us to any pleasure. And then he said, but pleasure without knowledge was not working out, because you're having all this pleasure, but we're doing it in a non-knowledgeable way. And we just end up burning ourselves. And that's, I believe, is a sad picture nowadays. We believe that we are having this pleasure and that is normal, but it's quite naive because a lot of our so-called pleasure today leads us to a lot of stress, distress, and sufferings in the future. So pleasure without knowledge, he said, doesn't work out. And knowledge without pleasure, what is the use? Right? So here we are being introduced that like, no, you know, you cultivate all this knowledge and you kind of, in one sense, you control our desires to enjoy materially by developing this higher intelligence, and we cultivate this knowledge, but then we go inside and what we find there is the true pleasure, is the true pleasure that the soul, the only pleasure that can actually satisfy the soul, that is not temporary, that doesn't end on Monday morning. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't start on Friday afternoon and ends on Monday morning. It doesn't end when summertime is over and it's now winter. It doesn't end when you have to get on the airplane and go back to wherever you came from. Let's say you go to a vacation trip in a very wonderful place and you enjoy that, but then the vacation ends and you got to get on the airplane and come back. So not this kind of enjoyment, an enjoyment that is within you, always accessible, and it can take you to very high levels of pure enjoyments. And that's really what spiritual life is about. It's not just restraining our senses and being so austere and a monk that doesn't engage on anything and is so boring and so on. It's like, no, it's about loving the supreme lover and what can make us, what can bring us a higher pleasure than true deep love for the person that can reciprocate in the most perfect way, who is Krishna. You know, and that's what we find there. So I'm very glad that, as you mentioned, we are getting to a theology now here where Krishna is introducing himself as part of the equation. You know, fix your consciousness upon me. Now it's me and you, and we're both spiritual, eternal, full of bliss, full of knowledge. And that is a higher taste. And that's higher consciousness. That is why we develop all this intelligence to be able to experience this love, which is higher.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a, what you were talking about earlier about Krishna being a person. When you really think about that, and the implications of it, of this loving relationship, having a relationship with the most perfect supreme lover, um, and what that would mean for your daily life, uh, is where a lot of the joy and happiness, where all the joy and happiness comes from, of that interaction of how Krishna interacts with our lives, you know, whether we notice it or not, and
Yes,
synchronicities.
he know his memory is perfect. He never forgets anything. So every little act we do to please him, he's extremely grateful for. That's one of his main qualities, right? Krishna is very grateful. So every little thing we do to please him, he never forgets. And he's very grateful. Whereas our experience here is like, you know, we have beloved friends, of course we do. And we do various things. And because we're still faulty in our consciousness, sometimes we expect something in return. And if you don't get that something in return, then it gets a little shaky. You know, it's also all of these relationships that we encounter here. I shouldn't say all. I say there's a high probability that most relationships we experience in the material world will be less than perfect and will leave us with a sour taste in our mouth, whether a person didn't reciprocate the way you expected, or whether the relationship in time just faded away. You know, that's not Krishna. Krishna never forgets what we do for him, and he wants to reciprocate more than we can ever imagine. So yes, you're absolutely right. We're talking about a perfect person here. And to be in a loving, deep, true, sincere relationship with such a person, what else can bring us a higher pleasure than that? You know, he's actually our friend. He actually loves us. You know, I think it's so interesting how we are explaining what an impersonal take to spiritual life would be like. It would be conceiving of this higher power as just that, a power. It's some kind of metaphysical, abstract intelligence that is out there, but not really a person, right? So many people talk like that. Oh, the universe is trying to teach me something. Well, let's break that down. Let's analyze that. If the universe is trying to teach you, I mean, what an intelligence! Because we know there's 7 billion people on this planet. And let's not get to the whole cosmology of innumerable planets and multi-universes and so on. Let's just focus on our own little planet here. There are 7 billion people here. And if the universe is capable of actually reaching out to you specifically and help you and like try to teach you something, like that's an amazing intelligence, because now the universe is capable of interacting with 7 billion people. Because the universe would not discriminate against your neighbor, right? If the universe is trying to teach you something, you would teach somebody else just in the same way. So, and if it is capable of reaching down to you and teach you, then the universe must also know what it is that you need to learn, because it's going to teach you specifically the thing that you're missing. And then now let's putting it all together. So the universe knows what you need. The universe is wanting to give you what you need, which also implies that the universe is very merciful, because it actually is moved by the fact that you are in need and that you need help. So the universe is moved by that fact and wants to do something to help you. So what a merciful universe that might be. And it can reach down to you through 7 billion different possibilities and give you specifically what you need. Well, what a knowledge, right? And and how powerful that is. Because it can, like, whatever the universe comes from, like it comes from the depths of the universe, billions of light years away is the known universe. And then it can cross through all of that space and time. As we know, time is relative as we go farther out in our universe, right? So it can cross all this time and space and reach down to you. Well, what a powerful universe that must be. But what do we mean here? It is conscious also, right? Because it has to be conscious in order to know that you are, as another conscious person, has this need. So if you put it all together, what are we talking about? It is conscious, it is all powerful, it is all knowledgeable, and it is all merciful. Those are attributes of a person. That's a person. It is a person that has those attributes. And it must be the supreme person. And that's Krishna. So it's so beautiful to have this conception, this understanding, quite rational also, that God is a person. And to be in this relationship with God, it's such a higher taste.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think this is the real evolution here in this part of chapter 2 that we went over yesterday.
Yeah, we're kind of towards the end, running out of time, but I wanted to touch on one other aspect. It was from text 56, about one who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. So they talk about the threefold miseries. Can you elaborate on the threefold miseries?
Yes. So we are the spirit soul inside of the body. And as such, we're going to experience miseries as we just trying to navigate through life. And these miseries can be of 3 kinds, threefolds. One are the miseries that we are going to experience that is caused by other people that are around us. So we, the souls inside of our body, experience miseries due to other people coming around and making things bad for us. And one example would be you as a honorable citizen of our society, driving down the freeway with your seatbelt on, attentive, under the speed limit, and safely doing so. And then a person who just got off their jobs on a Friday night, who got intoxicated and wants to go to a nightclub in a rush, and they come and down and crash on you and put you in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. Well, that's, that's another person causing that. Or a bad relationship, either within your family members or your or romantic partner that just turned south. And, you know, we have a name for that. It's called divorce. And the experience of that, it's not pleasant. It causes a lot of distress. And that is, again, misery caused by another person. And what to speak of the dictators in history, right? People such as Adolf Hitler, or, I don't want to get so political right now, but I can think of other leaders of societies that are less than ideal, and they end up causing such miseries for us. And this is just miseries caused by people around us. So that's one of the folds. The other fold is miseries caused by material nature itself. So an example of that would be a hurricane, or for us here in Southern California, an earthquake, right? Or a tsunami wave that wipes out, thousands and thousands of people, as we recently, not so recently anymore, but in the Asian part of our world, where the tsunami wave came in and just destroyed thousands and thousands of lives. Or extreme hot conditions of summertime, or extreme cold conditions of wintertime, or tsunami or a monsoon rain falls, So these things are happening, and there's really nothing we can do about it. It's just nature doing its thing. And they are a big source of miseries, right? So, and we, the soul inside of the body, experience that. And last, but certainly not least, the miseries caused by our own body and mind. Again, I mentioned we are the soul inside of the body, and I'm going to start that purposefully to get to this third one. The third one here is the mind and the body that is causing the misery to us, the soul inside of the body. So when our body starts to get old, and we start experiencing the miseries of old age, that old age can be even made worse by various diseases, mental diseases of Alzheimer, Parkinson's, and so on, or let's say a coronavirus for that matter, of nowadays. It is due to the body. It's due to the fact that you are inside of that body, and that body is going to be a source of misery to you as well. And also your mind, right? It is known today, I forget the name of the committee, like the World Health Organization, like people that concerns themselves with the health of the whole world, right? So there's a whole body of people that preoccupies themselves with the health of the world. They have already stated that the modern disease of nowadays is a mental one, is that of depression that impacts so many people in the world today. So this is, our mind, our psychology. And we, the soul inside of the body, under this mind that is now depressed, we will experience so much miseries, right? So these are the three miseries. Miseries that are caused by other people around you, miseries caused by material nature itself, and miseries caused by your own body and mind. So Krishna is here saying that if you're engaged in yoga, in Buddha yoga, as we have been discussing in the beginning of chapter 2, and you are able to remain peaceful even amidst the three folds of miseries, the threefold miseries, and also remain even minded when you are very elated, like very happy about something, then you are that yogi. That yogi that Krishna is talking about here in chapter 2, acting in this world and being peaceful amidst all these miseries, these threefold miseries, and also being peaceful when there's an extreme amount of happiness around you. And you are always peaceful, you're always even minded amidst these miseries or extreme happiness, then you are that yogi. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it really encompasses any kind of suffering that we would experience in this world.
Yeah, it's very complete. Krishna,
Yeah.
no stones unturned.
Yeah. All
And
right.
it's
Well,
natural, right? Because if we know, like, hey, I'm not this body, right? And this misery from another person is being caused to this body. The material nature is causing this body to suffer, and this mind and body is coming from the mind and the body. But I am the soul. I'm not any of that. So I'm going to be as even minded as I can. That's the yogi, acting with the Sankhya understanding.
yeah. Yeah. And I really like this point that we're at in the Gita because, Krishna's telling us everything about, okay, what a self-realized soul looks like. And now he's going into how do we become a self-realized soul? Because like we said earlier, sometimes if you're new to spirituality or some new tradition, it all seems very idealistic or kind of pie in the sky, hopes and dreams. But yeah, I love that Krishna is going to be laying out exactly how to go about this.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
So
All
I'm looking
right.
forward to the next episode to figure out how is it.
All right. Well, yeah, and hopefully Varangi will be back, and yeah. So we will post the episodes to all of Tukram Prabhu's lectures. It's every Friday at the Laguna Temple, not during quarantine, but it's all online on Facebook, and I'll post the links there. And if you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe or share it with your friends. And thank you so much for listening and taking the time to share your day with us. So thank you, Tadeo Prabhu. Thank
Hare
you for your
Krishna.
time.
My pleasure.
Hare Krishna. See you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on Simple Living, High Thinking. Please subscribe as new episodes post every Monday. You can tune into this podcast live every Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific Time. Check out our website for more details at simplelivinghighThinking.net. And if you would like to nominate someone for a devotee spotlight interview, contact us via our website at simplelivinghighThinking.net.